A landmark ruling, the Supreme Court says same-sex couples can marry anywhere in the country.
The Affordable Care Act is here to stay.
The subsidy stand. The High Court upholds the Affordable Care Act. Continued coverage for more than 1 million right here in Florida.
And you're fired. Major blowback for Donald Trump after blunt comments about Mexicans. Good morning. So glad you could be with us this morning. What a week marked by two huge, major Supreme Court decisions. Decisions
affecting so many in our communities. And we begin with the love and legalities of the Supreme Court's decision on same-sex marriage.
All people should be treated equally, regardless of who they are or who they love.
Years in the making, marriage equality is now the law of the land, and for many, it is a moment of triumph. For others, they say a faulty, bad decision.
With us today to talk about it all, Elizabeth Schwartz, one of the attorneys who represented plaintiffs who challenged and overturned Florida's same-sex marriage ban.
Professor James Willits is professor of law, Nova Southeastern University, and chair of the Inter-American Center for Human Rights. And Juan Vasquez is an old friend of mine, the deputy editorial page editor of the Miami Herald, who happens to edit my op-ed pieces. And thank you very much, Juan.
Oh, that's some good intel this morning.
A good job. But
good morning.
Glad to have you all here. Elizabeth Schwartz, you have spent the weekend, I mean, you have been deeply involved in the issue of same-sex marriage. For years, you've represented a number of plaintiffs in the case against the trying to get a marriage license in Miami-Dade County. So tell us about this weekend. What have your friends, what has been the buzz? What have people been saying?
There's been a lot of buzzy buzz, lots of champagne popping, lots of celebration.
I can hear it in your voice.
Right, exactly. Lots of fun, but also lots of redoubling our efforts, lots of talking about what's next, talking about sort of doubling down on all of the additional efforts that we're going to have to take to make sure that we bring justice to all of the implementation of marriage equality. There's so many constellations of rights that we need to still sort of visit upon. So we've been having great fun, but we know that we're not done yet.
Planning the agenda for the future, because I mean, I remember I heard in one newscast over the weekend, Senator Rob Portman of Ohio saying now we've got to change Social Security laws. All kinds of things have to be brought up to date to reflect this decision.
Absolutely. There's 1,138 federal rights associated with marriage. And so we're going to have to visit upon the language. I mean, just, you know, I do a lot of adoption work, and one of the lines in our statute, Chapter 63, who can adopt jointly? A husband and wife. So, I mean, there's just all these little things that are big things that we're going to have to visit upon line by line. It's going to take some time, but we'll get there.
Jim Willits, you're a professor of constitutional law. You know, I don't want to delve too deeply into the process of this, but most people will not read an entire opinion. And 4 different dissents. I mean, educate the lay people. Is that a normal kind of Supreme Court dissent, to have all 4 who dissented write their own dissents, and very different dissents as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's not that unusual, and I think that each one brings a different perspective. For example, you see Scalia's was unremarkable, it was visceral, it was bombastic.
And it was personal regarding Anthony Kennedy as well.
Exactly. And what I think is, I think what that does is it shifts the focus from his visceral dislike of gay people. It shifts it from his hypocrisy, because his main point was that this is a destruction of democracy, that these 9 justices are making a decision in place of the people. And yet, just only a matter of weeks ago or months ago, he overturned the will of Congress, the vast majority of Congress, in striking down parts of the Voting Rights Act, which was passed by a great majority of Democrats and Republicans.
I mean, you are a law professor. Isn't his language the kind of language that law professors reserve for first-year law students who had no business in law school? Loquacious, like something you'd find in a fortune cookie, pretentious.
He put his head in a bag.
All right, here's a quote, gentlemen and ladies. The opinion is couched in a style that is as pretentious as its content is egotistic. Of course, the opinion's showy profundities often are profoundly incoherent. Boy,
ouch.
What a put down.
I think he's talking to a colleague on the Supreme Court of the United States.
Right.
And,
it's amazing.
And just in a stark contrast, John Roberts' dissent was very gracious and very kind. And it almost seemed to me in reading it that this man would have voted the other way, but for questions about the democratic process.
He sounded like a Chief Justice.
He sounded like a Chief Justice, although it did mask an attitude that is very problematic, which is he indicated, he attacked the majority for attacking those who would not support the right to marriage. And he said that that's simply unfair. And the problem with that is I think that you can't be against equal rights for marriage, something that everybody takes for granted, who's not gay, and say you're not anti-gay. If you're anti-gay, that's fine. Not fine, I don't personally think that's a good thing, but at least be honest about it, own it. Own your anti-gayness, but don't say, I love gay people, I just don't think they should be married. Can you imagine saying to a Jewish person, oh, I love Jewish people, I just don't think they should be able to be married?
You know, that was one of the things brought up by locally, and Elizabeth, I know this was one of your cases, the Delmays, Jeff and Todd Delmay were one of the 6 couples who got the ban overturned in Miami-Dade. And they are an interracial couple. And we were speaking the other day, and what he was telling me was, Jeff was saying, what shocks me is that people look at us and they discuss and debate our gay marriage, but no one ever debates our interracial marriage, to which I said, I actually didn't even realize you were an interracial couple. But that's how far we've come on that account in some ways. And so answer me this also. Do you think that the day that this opinion came down, the same day as DOMA was overturned a few years ago, the same day as Lawrence was overturned, sodomy laws, and referencing the interracial couple case, do you think that this was a day that the justices decided we're going to do this to make a mark? Did I stump you?
You mean a specific calendar day? Is that what you mean? Like the 26th?
Yeah.
Like they added the day, you know, to
and
be...
they lumped all of these things, to your point. They really acknowledged how far this country has come in opinions and perspectives on same-sex couples, just like interracial couples before them.
But how quickly it's happened.
Yeah.
Yes.
When Chief Justice Roberts was nominated, underwent his confirmation hearing to replace Chief Justice Rehnquist, if someone had said at that time, this will be the presiding Chief Justice when the Supreme Court overturns the ban on same-sex marriage, no one would have believed.
That's true. Elizabeth, let me ask you a question. In fact, I asked you the other day, the day of the decision, but I've been thinking about it more, and that is the point that Juan makes, which is only 7 years ago, a blink in the span of time, the voters of Florida, 62% of Florida voters approved a constitutional amendment saying that only a man and a woman could be married. Now, as the polls say, about 62%, 2/3 of Floridians and 2/3 of this country approve of it. How did this happen so quickly?
How did the change in public opinion happen?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, because of conversations like this that we're having in the public forum, and then also because of the conversations that have been had in these private spaces, because of all of the millions of brave people who have come out and continue to come out in day after day and moment after moment and telling their dentist and their dry cleaner, not to mention, you know, their parents and their loved ones and their employers, which we ought to talk about how that's something we still got to work on. So I think that when people meet us, when they see our lives, when they see that all we want is just the same right to love and care for each other as anyone else has, I think it takes the fear away, right? I mean, I think that bigotry comes from ignorance, from fear, from lack of familiarity, from lack of understanding. So I think that the more we come out, the more we can have these conversations publicly and privately. It's hard for people to demonize us.
I think that sort of goes to the point that answers the question that the Chief Justice asked. Who are we to make this decision? And Justice Kennedy was saying the court follows the social landscape.
Yet the decision was put to a vote here.
I disagree with that statement that we follow the opinion of the public. Remember, in the early 1960s, over 90% of white Americans opposed mixed-race marriage. Nevertheless, the Supreme Court held that the right of different races to marry was a fundamental right, and that was against public opinion. And so it seems very disingenuous for the dissents to say, oh, you're just making up this right because public opinion has changed. In fact, they made that same determination in Loving v. Virginia.
Yeah.
And
it's also what the courts are for, right? I mean, the courts are to right the wrongs of sometimes a very flawed public process. I mean, Jim Crow was enacted. I mean, people voted. You know, I mean, if it wasn't for the courts and being so helpful in propelling social justice forward, we still would have segregation probably.
Kennedy said that explicitly. We are still learning the meaning of freedom.
Right.
Right.
And
Those
the will,
are his words.
And the
Right.
will of the majority cannot infringe upon even one person's rights.
And I think that what I think Justice Roberts, Chief Justice Roberts said in his opinion essentially was a referendum of voters' will does not transcend the rights in the Constitution.
Sorry you voted on something that's discriminatory and unfair, but that doesn't make it constitutional.
Yeah. All right, everyone hold your thoughts. We're going to take a break. We'll be back with our guests in just a minute.
We are back talking about the big SCOTUS opinions this week with Elizabeth Schwartz, an attorney who was very involved in the same-sex marriage cases locally, Jim Willits from Nova Southeastern University, constitutional professor of law, so to speak, Juan Vasquez, deputy editor, editorial page editor of the Miami Herald. Let's move on to the Affordable Care Act opinion 6-3, which surprised a lot of people because the Chief Justice's opinion was something they found surprising coming from him. And Jim Willits, does this opinion allowing these subsidies to stand almost make this Affordable Care Act stronger, and it also takes away some of the restraints on any kind of regulatory changes now? So not only does it let the subsidy stand, does this make the whole law even stronger?
Well, it certainly makes the law work. The law doesn't work very well without it. I think actually, Roberts is a very practical man. I think we've all seen that. And what he did was essentially a gift to both conservatives and liberals, and that's what Roberts likes to do. And it's a gift to the Republicans in the sense that the states that would be primarily hurt from the withdrawal of federal subsidies would be red states, such as Florida. Florida is actually the largest state that would be hurt.
Yeah, we're a purple state, but red and blue. But
right, exactly, exactly. But we would be hurt the
I mean, we had 1.3 million Floridians who are enrolled who get subsidies, and they would have suddenly woken up in the morning and they would have, insurance companies would have said, either pay your full premium, which amounted to maybe $350 a month, as opposed to $82 a month, or you lose your coverage. And most would have lost their coverage.
That's right. So I see this as primarily a pragmatic decision by Roberts. I don't see it as, in that sense, I think it's extremely significant for the millions of people that are affected. I don't see it as that significant in terms of a movement of the court. I thought the court's decision on, for example, the Fair Housing Act was a much bigger shift, because there you find Kennedy eliminating one of the barriers to bringing discrimination suits based on race. And Kennedy has always been very, very hard on bringing race claims.
What do you think the practical application of that will be long term?
Quite large, actually, because the litigation based on discrimination is predicated on finding intent in many cases, and intent is extremely hard to find because there's many people involved in making a law, there's many people in taking a governmental decision.
Yeah, Juan, let me ask you, the reaction from the huge field of Republican presidential candidates on both these rulings has been utterly fascinating. Most of the Republican presidential candidates for the ACA decision said this is still a terrible law, still plan to repeal it, would get rid of it if I'm elected. And I really do think, looking at this, that the law may be amended in the future, but it seems to be a settled matter of law. It's going to exist.
That's what the president was trying to say when he came out in the Rose Garden.
Yeah.
Almost like whistling past the cemetery. There are other lawsuits coming, one from the House of Representatives, where the lead plaintiff there is John Boehner.
Right.
So this is not the last word. However, I was struck by the difference between this and what happened in the same-sex marriage case. Mm-hmm. Alabama has been one of the states that's been the most recalcitrant.
Yeah.
The ruling came out at 10 o'clock. By 1 o'clock, courthouses in Alabama were issuing same-sex marriage
Wow,
licenses.
wow. You know-
Now, I think we do have to make a distinction between repeal and dismantling it.
Yeah.
Jeb Bush, for example, was very clear, saying, if I go for repeal, then X, Y, and Z.
Right.
But he hasn't decided.
So with all the talk of the GOP candidates right now and those who are about to be, does this opinion sort of take that off the table for the presidential election, or does it mean that all of these candidates have to come up with much more of a detailed plan that they can work with on the campaign trail rather than just saying, you know, repeal, I'm against it?
Well, I think that's been the weakness in their argument, that they don't have a viable alternative yet. And I think that will be an issue in the campaign,
Yeah.
because they will be asked, so what's your answer, practically speaking?
Well, that has been the question. You know, Liz, I want to go back just for a second to the same-sex marriage ruling, because Pam Bondi, Florida's Attorney General, who fought this at every turn and said it's my responsibility and I can't look into her heart, so I don't know what she really believed. They could have dropped some of the appeals at some point. But in her statement in reaction to this, at one point in the statement it says, quote, legal efforts were not about personal beliefs or opinions, but rather the rule of law. And I looked at that and I thought to myself, goodness, of course it's about personal beliefs and opinions. That's what this was about.
It's such a stretch. It's such a stretch that she would say that. There were quite a few attorneys general in other states who stopped, and the federal government, you know, our federal attorney general Holder, and at various state levels where attorneys general were like, we're not going to defend this thing.
Right.
It's
Well,
pure discrimination.
Scott Walker's attorney general in Wisconsin,
Right.
a Republican, said, no, we're not going to appeal. I mean, they could have done the same in Florida, but
Virginia, Kentucky,
anyway,
I mean,
it's
Well,
over now.
and this brings us back, I think, to Scalia's opinion, where it was very interesting that he started out by saying, I don't personally care one way or the other. Well, that sort of rang a little bit of she doth protest too much. But then he goes on to give a legal argument that was completely hypocritical. Again, he's saying, I'm upset because this is against the Constitution and this is destroying democracy, when he did, again, the same, he committed the same crime in Shelby County. Which brings us back to the point that what he was really upset about, obviously, was he just doesn't like gay people, but doesn't want to admit it. And I just think people need to own their actual positions on this issue. It also shows Scalia is goal-oriented. He is not law. He's not approaching this as a legal principle.
Right.
He's couching it.
And how about Justice Thomas's argument that the government can't take away dignity from people? The government didn't take dignity away from people.
Slaves.
It's from slaves. Really?
It was almost an unbelievable dissent.
Yeah. You know,
I have to read it
one
a
of
few
the one of the reactions I've got to say that I thought was moderate and well done from someone who opposes it was from Jeb Bush. Here is the statement that he sent out, a printout of the email. And Juan Vasquez, you know, what he says here is, in a country as diverse as ours, good people who have opposing views should be able to live side by side. Now crucial that as a country we protect religious freedom and the right of conscience and also not discriminate. That's not inflammatory language at all. I think that he is saying, all right, I don't like the opinion, but we've got to live with it and respect different points of view.
I think that they want to take this off the table as an issue for the campaign. On the other hand, there is a serious concern among some people that if you, as an established church, do not want to get involved in these kinds of marriages, you will have a legal problem. They feel that that would be the next logical step, or some people would see it.
Yeah, well,
So they want to protect that.
well, what is the status now about the baker who doesn't want to bake the cake or the florist who doesn't want to provide the flowers? I mean,
You still have to obey public accommodations laws. So there's no religious exemption to public accommodations laws. But no minister is going to have to marry a person of the same sex if he or she doesn't want to.
You know, along the same lines, how strong will this opinion be when the rest of the private sector discriminatory practices that still stand are sort of put up to scrutiny? I mean, does this help in that respect start sort of chipping away at private sector discriminatory practices in all of, especially there's a transgender community up and coming right now really looking for assistance. How strong is this opinion?
Well, obviously the Constitution requires state action for it to apply, but you've already seen almost the vast majority of the major corporations in this country support equal rights for their gay employees, and I think this certainly provides enormous impetus for that.
And this is where we need to turn our attention. I mean, we have people are going to get married this weekend and go to work on Monday and get fired. In Florida, 57 out of 67 of our counties have no protections for employment discrimination.
Is there not a state statute that provides
There's not
that?
a state statute. There's no federal protection. There is no protection on our federal or state level. And in 57 out of our 67 counties in Florida, it is perfectly fine to fire a person.
Worth it to say that the counties in this viewing area, Dade, Broward, Monroe, Palm Beach, are not among those.
Not among those.
Right.
All
Absolutely.
right. Well, thank you all very much for a enlightened discussion about some really huge issues. Glad to have you come in this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you, Glenna.
Thank you, Glenna.
Up next, we take it all to the round table. Stay with us.
Okay, time now for a closer and more analytical look and also some opinion about the week's top stories with our Powerhouse Roundtable. And back with us today, Rosemary O'Hara, the editorial page editor of the Sun Sentinel and a veteran roundtabler. And we welcome for the first time today Nadege Green, reporter for WLRN Public Radio South Florida, former Miami Herald reporter, and Sergio Bustos, currently the state and politics editor for the Herald and soon to be political correspondent for the Associated Press. Good morning.
Good morning.
Great to have you all come in.
Good timing for that. Yeah, thanks so much for being here. So, were you surprised at the opinions, Rosemary, that came out this week?
Oh my God, what a week it was. You know, a monumental week really in our nation, both with the two Supreme Court rulings on gay marriage and on Obamacare, but also some big wins, the president on trade legislation, and then of course seeing the Confederate flag, on the flagpole into the ground.
This is actually a roundtable of journalists today, and I always feel like one of the really wonderful things about our job is we get to witness history, document history, and write the first page, and that's what I felt like this week was so amazing.
But rarely do we have a kind of a collision of so many huge social political issues. I don't know. Nadege, you are the junior member chronologically of this group, but I mean,
and that's a good thing.
And that's a very good thing, but I'm sure you've never seen anything like this in your professional lifetime.
No, not like in this week. It's been a very busy week in the newsroom.
And exciting,
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely.
Very, very exciting. Sergio, when you look at these decisions and the reactions that we saw from various presidential candidates, Republican candidates, I mean, some of them, frankly, bordered on the absurd. Ted Cruz saying we ought to have, every 4 years, merit retention of Supreme Court justices. I mean, give me a break. This is not going to happen.
There was some, especially in the Republican field, remember, you have about 25, 30 people running for president on the Republican side. And I'm joking about that, but essentially it's all the way up to 13, 14 now. And you do have this huge spectrum of from saying that the same-sex marriage decision was an act of tyranny by the Supreme Court. I think Mike Huckabee said that. And then you had someone like Jeb Bush saying, look, let's agree to disagree and let's move on.
How fine a line do GOP candidates have to walk when they're campaigning about an issue like same-sex marriage?
Well, it's really so hard for the Republicans because you're dealing with one electorate in one election in the primary, and then you've got to pivot and then speak to the general public in a general election where your messages have to be so different. I think it's a very hard thing. I don't envy being a Republican strategist.
Well, and the Democrats, in fact, you've seen Hillary Clinton move, I think, considerably to the left. I mean, a lot more liberal than she had been. Rosemary, let me ask you, Marco Rubio, I think, made a reasonable statement about the Supreme Court same-sex marriage decision, and he said, it is the right of the people legislatively, not the right of unelected judges or justices of the Supreme Court to make this kind of a decision. What would you say to Senator Rubio?
Well, I guess his argument gets at states' rights, that states ought to be able to pass these laws and the federal government steps out of it. But, you know, it depends whether you're on the left or on the right, and what the court does is that's the lens through which you see it. And so for this week, for people who are more on the left side or socially liberal, it's like we kind of expected the ruling on gay rights. Obamacare was, oh my gosh, we're not sure we're there. And so there was a sense of relief. On the other hand, you look at this court, it's the same court that passed ruled on Citizens United, which has upended our politics. And when they ruled in that case, those on the right would say, you know, they applauded. So it depends on the ruling. This John Roberts court is a fascinating court to watch. And I would just finally say, and the importance of this court in the upcoming presidential election, because this court is old. We have some of these people who weighed in on this decision who are in their 80s. And so the next presidential election is going to change the complexion of the court. And so it matters. Your vote matters.
Yeah, it certainly does. Nadej, when you looked at both the ACA and the same-sex marriage decision, what was your personal reaction? What did you think?
I think just like she said, you know, I think we expected gay marriage to become legalized across all states. I think we saw that coming. The ACA was definitely up in the air, and you were thinking, what is going to happen here? You know, will these federal subsidies be revoked, and what will that mean for Florida? But we've seen that had not happened.
You know what the most interesting thing was? It seemed like they were really focused on 4 words established by the state, and that really was the focus of 9 justices looking to see what did those 4 words mean. And what was interesting, Sergio, if you look at those 4 words, they're pretty clear. But the justices took those and went to content and went to intent. And I think some of the dissents had an issue with that, looking at the intent instead of the 4 words.
I also think, just in a bigger point of view here, larger view of everything, I think everyone gets caught up in the latest news of the moment. And granted, this was a really, really wild week. But if you look forward, and when people finally get to Election Day, I think this will be another issue, but at the end of the day, it's always going to be about the economy, taxes, and the like. So I don't think people are going to read into what the justices said or how it gets spun, because once you get to November 2016, it's all about myself, my family, my pocketbook. And I think that's what it'll eventually return to.
What would have happened if they had overturned? What would have happened if those subsidies
Then
ended?
it would have been a pocketbook issue, because then you're looking at 6 million Americans having to come up with the money to pay for Obamacare.
Right, and 1.3 million Floridians, as we said before. Rosemary, I thought you made, the Sun-Sentinel in its editorial made a really good point. We talked about this in the first segment, but let me get you to opine on it. The shift in public opinion. This has been transformational on a huge issue. I mean, it's essentially, we're talking about what is marriage and who can be married.
Right.
And here within the space of, in Florida, of 7 years, there's been this huge turnaround. What do you think accounts for it?
Oh, wow. You know, it seemed, as you said, you know, like in 2008, what 61% of people in Florida said it should be a man and a woman, and it became, you know, it was a talking point in that campaign, and people got agitated. But since then, you know, more people have come out, and the military, you know, so the military's been a leader in social change, really, and Don't Ask, Don't Tell was one of those things. So more people started coming out, and more people knew people who were gay, and...
Well, don't you think, if I may say, that, I mean, I'll speak personally about myself, which I don't really like to do, but, I mean, I looked around, and I didn't vote 7 years ago for that constitutional amendment. But since then, I began to look around and looked at people who I work with, who are friends of mine, the people at my cleaners, the people at the drugstore, people I interact with all the time, and I realized that I knew some were gay, and then I realized a lot more were gay, and they're wonderful people, and they have relationships. And I think I said to myself, and I think most people in society said to themselves, who does it harm who they love?
Right. Yes, I mean, my marriage isn't threatened because people who are gay today can get married. And if you really believe in small government and getting government out of your bedroom or out of your life, you know, I agree. I think the candidates have got to have some sense of relief that this issue, this wedge issue, is sort of decided. Yeah. On the other hand, Obamacare, while it was a big decision that, you know, it's still the law of the land, there continues to be a lot of attacks on the federal legislation in Congress. So that fight's going to continue, and I do hope that we get away from repeal, replace, or just repeal into let's make it better. You know, this law needs to be addressed, but nobody wants to open that can of worms because, you know, if you open it, then it might go down.
Right.
It needs fixing.
On that note, a perfect way to head to a break, and we will be right back.
Welcome back on the Sunday morning, live in our studio with our roundtable. And Nadege Green, you have done some excellent reporting over the last months, in fact, about Haiti and lately about this dispute between the Dominican Republic and Haiti and laws which have been passed in the Dominican Republic, which put, what, 250,000 Haitians and Dominicans of Haitian descent in jeopardy of being deported. Tell us, where does this stand?
I mean, right now, I think the big concern for human rights groups, for local Haitian community, immigrant advocates, is that you are leaving Dominicans who were born in the Dominican Republic stateless. These are individuals whose parents were Haitian, but they themselves were born in the Dominican Republic. But because of this constitutional amendment, it retroactively strips people of Dominicans of Haitian heritage of their citizenship.
Going back to what, 1929?
1929.
Yeah.
Can you compare this at all to what dreamers here go through, children who were brought here from somewhere else by their parents illegally, who had nothing to do with that decision? And if this government were to get to a point, instead of accepting them under executive order, to deport them, that's almost kind of, you know, it's not apples and apples, but it's not apples and oranges. It's that same personal statelessness.
I mean, we are, especially Miami, we're a city of immigrants. It's as if saying that if your parents came here illegally, right? So if your parents are Haitian, Cuban, Jamaican, whatever island or place they came from, and you were born here, dating back to 1929 now, you can no longer call yourself a U.S. citizen. That is the equivalent.
I think it's almost like the birther movement is probably a better
that's a good analogy.
It's really gone wild, where you really are claiming that even if your parent, even if you were born in the country, the United States, you'd be deported. It's really crazy.
You know, we've seen locally protests. A lot of the Haitian American community have been very vocal about that, and there's so much fear. Where is the Martelly government on this? You know, the island of Hispaniola, there are border crossings going on as we speak. What is that government doing or not doing?
I mean, we know that there are welcome centers that are planned. I mean, there was a community meeting this week with award-winning authors Juno Diaz, who is Dominican, and Edwidge Danticat, who's Haitian. And, you know, she talks about these welcome centers that are not yet built, that are tractors are sitting on them. And at the most recent protest, which was at the Dominican Consulate office in Brickell, and went to the Haiti Consulate office around not too far from there, you know, people were saying, like, shame on you to the Haitian government for saying, welcome back. Welcome back to where? These are people who don't know Haiti. These are individuals who may not speak Creole. I mean, these are third, fourth generation Dominicans, and they identify as Dominican. This is all they know.
Yeah, I have heard the phrase, and it's a worrisome phrase. Some people have said this amounts to ethnic cleansing. Is this, in fact, I mean, if Dominicans think of themselves as basically light-skinned people, and we're going to get rid of the dark-skinned people, and Haitians, by and large, are dark-skinned people, I mean, is this the equivalent of kind of an ethnic cleansing?
You definitely have that sentiment out there right now, that people are saying that this is ethnically motivated, even racially motivated in some instances. Edwidge Danticat at this event talked about the Parsley Massacre, right, in 1937, where Trujillo, you know, soldiers went around the Dominican Republic, and they would go to someone, preferably someone dark-skinned, and ask them, can you say perejil, the Spanish word for parsley? And if you could not roll your R properly, you were killed. And so she pointed to this as an example of the tensions that have existed historically between the Dominican Republic and Haitians, and how all of this, plays in the sentiment of, outrage that you're hearing right now, that, people are skeptical of how this is going to be implemented and who's going to be affected.
But just to set the other side of the story, this is supposed to be immigration control. I mean, that's what the Dominican government, right? It's supposed to be, we're controlling our borders. Is that their stated intent?
Well, I guess it'd be an example from America if as Donald Trump has suggested, we build up a huge wall and he would build it. I mean...
Yeah, and the Mexicans would pay for it, yeah.
You could look to this is where an extreme comes in, where you've got a government really trying to radically enforce an immigration policy that seems on its face completely illogical.
Well, that's... I'm sorry,
I would just
Rosemary,
jump
go
in
ahead.
that, across the world, countries are wrestling with immigration. Better off countries are wrestling with it because, generally it's about when they need workers and when they don't need workers, and that's what we're seeing play out here. What the model or the lesson for us in Dominican Republic, one of them is there are a lot of people in this country who want us to round up all of the undocumented immigrants and send them home. And right now we're getting a good look at what it looks like to snatch people off the streets, to separate families, to take babies that were born there or grew up there and say, you got to go live over here. And are these family values? But on the one hand, a nation is in its rights to enforce its laws. But whether you round up people who've been there for generations, we're going to get to see what that looks like.
Yeah, and it's pretty ugly. In about a minute left, and I'm sorry we have only a minute for Donald Trump, but maybe that's what he deserves. But Sergio Bustos, these comments he made when he announced his candidacy, where he said Mexicans are thieves, immigrants who come to this country are thieves, they're rapists, oh, there may be one or two good ones. And it just sort of sat out there for 10 days until Univision said, no, we don't want to do business with you, and we don't want the Miss Universe pageant.
Hey, what took so long?
Yeah, it was a real issue with Univision because of their relationship with the beauty pageant. But also, Univision does not hide the fact that it really supports legalization, amnesty, if you will.
But what took Univision that much time? And he made those comments on June, what was it, 16th?
Yeah, I think they had to go to their lawyers and look at the contract.
Review the contract. So I have no idea why it took so long. But it really, now you've set off, Univision, a very powerful network in America.
The most watched Spanish language network in the country.
Yeah, I mean, it is one that is... it's equivalent of like ABC squaring off with,
right.
one of
and its main anchor, Jorge Ramos, who I admire a lot, is Mexican.
Donald Trump is polling number 2.
Yeah, well...
Same week.
I'll have a comment about this later in the program, but Rosemary, Nadej, Sergio, thank you all for coming in. Great conversation.
Good to be here.
Thank you.
Up next, New York City has the High Line. Can South Florida have an underline? Your first look at what could be a 10-mile-long park under Metro Rail is next.
This week, South Florida got its first look at what could be a 10-mile-long linear park on the unused land beneath the Miami-Dade Metro Rail tracks.
What they're calling the Underline takes cues from New York City's High Line Park. It's built on old elevated rail tracks. Beautiful, usable public space in a place that badly needs it.
Ah, the soundtrack of downtown Miami.
So you're hearing the urban experience, and that's what we want to capture.
And you're looking at what could be the start of a linear park 10 miles long underneath Metro Rail from the Miami River to Dadeland.
Having a park in an urban space that people don't have to go to as a destination, they arrive. just by living.
Meg Daly had that aha idea for the Underline after an injury kept her from driving, and she began using Metrorail, envisioning the shaded, unused corridor as an urban trail and park.
I would love for that to be a park because I'm a runner, I'm a biker.
Funding from a variety of grants paid for initial planning and before and after photos that show the possibilities at Brickell Station, at Dadeland, and Coconut Grove. Property owner Miami-Dade County is on board, as are the cities on the route, Miami, Coral Gables, and South Miami. Though Governor Rick Scott just vetoed a $2 million state allocation this year, the private sector Friends of the Underline is full steam ahead.
I'm really confident, and I think it's not just the vision of the idea, but it's the need. You know, Miami-Dade County is one of the most dangerous places to bike and walk in the country.
Initial reaction has been positive, really no outright opposition to the Underline, just the challenges of funding it. And plans by Florida Power and Light to install those giant concrete power towers along US 1, that may pose some problems too.
And more power to Meg and the people who want the Underline. Looks good. Still to come, my personal perspective about Donald Trump's outrageous comments about Mexicans and the late arriving pushback.
Good afternoon, South Florida. We're dealing with some showers out there. Not everybody's getting the rain, but if you are, these showers are heavy. North Lauderdale seeing the rain right now. Parts of Hialeah near Miami International Airport, Miami Springs as well. Just some spotty showers moving quickly from south to the north. Temperatures are reaching the low 90s already in Kendall, otherwise the upper 80s right now. The wind flow, as you can see, out of the south or even out of the southeast up to 10 miles per hour in Fort Lauderdale. Today, there's definitely the chance for the storms in the afternoon, but the chances for rainfall goes down tomorrow.
Jennifer, thanks. All right, before we leave you this morning, a personal perspective about Donald Trump. He got his comeuppance this week for offensive remarks he made the day that he announced that he is running for president. My question is, why did it take so long? Now, in case you somehow missed it, Trump said Mexican immigrants are robbers and rapists, and Mexico is no friend of the U.S. He admitted, oh yeah, there may be a few good Mexicans, but clearly he has never met one. Trump's idiotic and offensive comments just hung out there in the ether for a number of days, drawing little public reaction until this week when the Univision television network said, basta, Mr. Trump, we want nothing to do with you or your Miss Universe pageant, which Univision was going to broadcast in a few weeks. Trump is a partial owner of the pageant. It's now held in Doral, a predominantly Hispanic city. Well, once Univision showed some cojones, so did some of our politicians. Miami-Dade Mayor Carlos Jimenez said Trump can forget ever hoping to get the contract to manage the Crandon Park golf course. Doral's mayor, Luigi Boria, said Trump basically is a bigot, doesn't understand the contributions Hispanics have made to this country, and others involved in the pageant also found the courage to stand up to Donald Trump, too. All I can say is good. It's about time. We can't let bigoted remarks like Trump's go unchallenged, especially not from someone who says he wants to be the president of the United States. Trump never will be, but with his billions, his ego, his visibility on reality TV, he will be a player. I personally can't wait to see him in the Republican primary debates where he probably will make a fool out of himself, but yes, he can be an amusing fool. Not this time, though. His remarks about Mexicans were offensive and unacceptable. On the very first day of his presidential campaign, Donald Trump disqualified himself. That's my perspective for this week. Hope you have a great Sunday. Remember, as always, stay informed, get involved.
And as always, we want to know what you think about anything you heard today or anything in the news, really. Take a look at your screen. There are all the ways you can reach us. Email or Facebook or Twitter. If you find something else you like, we're into that too. We love to hear from you.
We do indeed, and we will get back to you.
Take care. Have a great Sunday.